To discuss is Blaze editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson. So Matthew, when we look at this story, it seems pretty significant that we're still learning all of these different details.
Yeah, what's astounding is week after week goes by, most of the mainstream media doesn't pay any attention to what's going on. Of course, they're not really talking about it every day, as they obviously would if the situation was reversed. And what is astounding is every week, every couple of days, we learn something that's just unbelievable. And, you know, I've seen this happen now since the day of until now. Revelation upon revelation keeps breaking across the land. It's sad.
It is absolutely sad. And let's go ahead and bring in Blaze investigative journalist Steve Baker into this conversation. And Steve, I just want to make sure you heard that question that we were talking about at the top of this segment. When we now have more information that the would-be Trump assassin was stopped when the SWAT team hit his rifle with a bullet. What can you tell us about this and the level of significance with this new revelation?
Yeah, it's significant to Joe Hanneman and myself because one of our sources on the ground that we were hearing from in the very initial hours after the shooting told us that they counted 3 holes in Thomas Crook. Well, that now makes sense because if a part of the rifle was destroyed and shrapnel poked him in the face, the neck, that explains what our source actually saw on the grounds. So we're actually very pleased that our sourcing was that accurate that day. And of course, it also answers a lot of questions about why the gun stopped firing so suddenly, and then there was the long pause before that 10th final sniper round that took him out.
And then some of the other news that we're getting today is the body of the would-be assassin has already been cremated, Steve. And Representative Higgins revealed in a preliminary investigation report that the FBI released his body just 10 days after the shooting and scrubbed the crime scene of biological evidence before Higgins could investigate the area. So we see throughout this entire investigation that we've been going through back and forth. Is this malice? Is this incompetence? But either way, this doesn't look good for the FBI. So why would they do this?
It's incomprehensible once again. And, you know, I get so tired of talking about our government and using words like incomprehensible and inexplicable. And especially when you have a professional, a seasoned professional like Clay Higgins. I'm actually sitting in Louisiana right now. That's where he, of course, is from. And he's a legendary sheriff. He knows how to handle investigative scenes, processes, murders, obviously, homicides of all types. And he is very clear that this should never have been done. That body should have never been turned over before multiple agencies had the opportunity to examine, do autopsies, make visual and other types of examinations on the body of Thomas Crooks for the purpose of knowing for sure what we are. Look, all of us, we just want the truth, right? That's it. At the end of the day, we want the truth, whatever it is. But the more and more you cover things up, the more and more you rush things to their conclusion, the less likely it is that we're ever going to close the book on this in a manner that's going to satisfy the American people.
Steve, can you talk a little bit about the back and forth between the federal officials and, you know, the locals? I mean, yeah. SWAT officer not being called out and praised versus, you know, the feds. There's been a lot of back and forth. And in the beginning, they were putting blame on the locals, right? I mean, what we were hearing from you know, even people I really like Bongino as well, the local people probably screwed up. And where do we stand when you look at that balance between them, this war?
This was another really important point to one of the sources that we had, was we were told literally within the, as I said, the opening hours after this event took place, that Crooks was shot from someone on the ground by a SWAT team operative on the ground. We knew that. I kept looking and listening for an 11th shot that would explain the 3rd hole, but now we know with the gun exploding. But this is, to getting to your question, is that with the breakdown between all of the agencies, they're going to point fingers. And somebody, you know, humorously said that the United States Secret Service motto now was CYA. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. They are in a definitive mode of covering their malfeasance, covering their incompetence that day, covering their multiple layers of failures. And the easiest thing for them to do is to blame the lowly sheriff's office. But, look, you and I all know that we believe that our sheriffs, for the most part, are our last line of defense here in this country, that they're going to protect us when the federal government finally fails us, ultimately and totally. And so there's a lot of competency in those SWAT, especially the SWAT teams, especially the counter assault teams at these local agencies. Some people say, "Oh, it's just a small town SWAT team. They don't know what they're doing." No, they have recruited people from our special forces that have had years of very, very high level of training overseas. Combat training. These guys know how to move towards the fire, and that's what this particular individual did. And he should be named. He should be called out as a hero because he ran towards the gunfire.
And you'd think, fresh off of this conversation, maybe things would change. But no, the Secret Service reportedly left Donald Trump vulnerable in an attack on Wednesday when a female agent abandoned her post to breastfeed her child during an event in Asheville, North Carolina. And the agency said, hey, you know what? There's going to be no impact on this Trump event. But Steve, we're not even 5 weeks away from the Trump shooting. So how are we now just here at this event happening days after this?
That's a question that can't be answered. I mean, it really can't. I didn't know that the federal government had a bring your infant to work day. And certainly that when somebody is going out to protect the former president of the United States, that they think somehow that that's appropriate to bring their breastfeeding infant to work that day. I don't even know. Have we even asked the question whether this was a breastfeeding woman or I don't even know what I don't even know.
Fair point. Fair point.
And but that's how absurd all of this is. And when I read this story yesterday, I literally just about popped. I with all of the time that I've spent in the last 5 weeks on this assassination attempt and looking at all of the nitty gritty details and the filings and the reports and talking to the sources. And then we find out that somebody literally was so incompetent that they brought their child and were breastfeeding, and then also brought in 2 of their family members who had not been cleared by the Secret Service to be there. That's, again, I said it earlier, it's inexplicable. It's incomprehensible. I can't get away from those words.
I know, it's over and over again. Steve, real quick, last question for you. I want to know what you think the number 1 or 2 next steps in investigating the assassination attempt are. Like, where are the loose threads right now?
I think that the loosest thread and the one that we really want to find out about is we need to learn more about Crook's prior activities and his prior associations. Now the day in and of itself is coming together because good reports like this coming from Clay Higgins, that helps tie up a lot of loose ends, helps confirm a lot of what we know, and that way we can release that that path and we can go in a new direction, pull a new thread. And so I think at this point that's where we're going to have to start looking, is in doing some geolocation on telephones, associations, things of that nature, and finding out who he was associating with over the 8, 10, 12 months before this event.
I know that you and Joe will continue to do all of the work that is necessary on this. Thanks for the update, Steve.
Thank you, guys.
Tim Walz tries to hide from his record on COVID, but we won't let him. Stay tuned. Under Tim Walz's leadership, 80% of COVID-related deaths occurred in long-term care facilities. This was the result of a disastrous policy that the Minnesota government has since scrubbed from its website. Here to discuss is Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent. So, Chris, we know this is a terrible thing, but will this impact the Americans' perception of Walz, or have people really already made up their minds?
Less so than made up their minds. People, the American people, have shown a shocking unwillingness to want to tackle really any of the memories that they have of COVID. Largely everyone lived through it, people, the guilty parties are everywhere. Disease definitely killed a number of people, but it was human beings and governors and mayors and hospital administrators and local police chiefs and local selectmen. Those people, principals, are the ones who kept your kids from school, who kept you from seeing your parents while they were dying, who didn't allow you to bury your children, who took the elderly and put them with COVID patients. Now, remember that even with the fog of war that was going on at the time, the two earliest things that we learned about COVID was that it specifically impacts the elderly, and it really doesn't hurt children. Those were among the first things we learned. But in blue states, really not in red states, in blue states, you had these policies over and over again of putting the elderly in with COVID and keeping children out of school for sometimes years at a time. But I've talked about looking into books on this matter, talked about the kind of reckoning that this country is needed, talked to different book publishers, talked to journalists, talked to politicians. And it does seem like the American people, by and large, just want to move on. And I do think that there's got to be some kind of looking back eventually, because so much of our society was changed outside of our control, and so many people hurt by people who are here right now and are just scrubbing it from the website and pretending it didn't matter. But politically, it's been a hard issue.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. And it's good to say that out loud to a right-leaning audience, because it's true. And a couple things there. One, BlazeTV has this series coming out called Cover Up. I mean, recently, Jill and I interviewed Matt Kebe on this. Incredible series with some brave people, Rand Paul and others, who stood out and spoke up. So I encourage people to go watch that to kind of get the reckoning that you're talking about that's so needed. But let's rack our brains here. I'm not sure myself. It's an open-ended question. I mean, I know in Michigan, for instance, Whitmer had similar policies and similar results. She still won. Didn't seem to affect her. Can we think of any politician that has had some kind of negative effect from these outrageous COVID policies?
And remember, Whitmer was the one who banned people from being able to buy farm seeds. You couldn't go to the garden store to buy seeds to grow a garden in their backyard because you might get sick. It was among the stupidest and most absurd. I haven't really seen any politicians who've been held accountable. And I remember thinking how shocking that was. How shocking, actually, that there was not even during those year of lockdowns, we didn't even see any kind of political violence. I mean, the 1960s, we saw political violence was very common in the United States. In 2020s, people lost their lives, lost their businesses, their families collapsed, people fell into substance abuse, deaths of despair. Wives would leave husbands with the kids because everything had gone haywire. And you didn't see any of that. People just seemed to kind of almost buy the propaganda. I flew, for example, during the height of COVID, maybe in the first month or two, from Washington, D.C., laid over in Chicago, landed in California, and then drove cross country to document what the country was like. And it was so different. D.C., everything was shut down. The airport, nothing was open except for your flight. Chicago was a city where the bars and restaurants were still shut down, but the airport bar was packed. For whatever reason, they decided it was okay to let people drink on airplanes at the time. And then you got out to California, the beaches were taped off. Police were arresting people who tried to go down and walk on the sand. And if you just drove 3 hours west, you'd be in a state that the casinos were open and the restaurants were open. Where I lived in Washington, D.C., where everything was shut down, no dancing allowed, no music, you couldn't sit at a bar. If you just literally walked from my home to Virginia or Maryland, you had a different experience. But everywhere we went, except for South Dakota, where people knew how good they had it, everywhere we went, people seemed to think that this was the disease's fault and not some bureaucrat's fault. They seemed to assume that it was the same everywhere and believe that lie that we're all in this together. It was a strange thing to see in an age that's so digital, where you really could just log online or call someone to learn that things are different just 50 miles away.
We don't want to go back to that, but let's dive into the political events that are happening, because last night Biden and Harris had an event where dozens of attendees left after Kamala finished speaking as she handed the podium off to Joe Biden. So Chris, please tell me that there's not actually enthusiasm right now behind Kamala Harris.
There is among the activists and the different people who she's stoked. And I do actually think a lot of that enthusiasm, as opposed to being for Kamala Harris, who's not really running an actual normal political campaign, has done an interview with Tim Walz, which was still somehow cringy, where they talked about music. I mean, Tim Walz offered his dog up to Vogue for an interview, and the palace eunuchs over there accepted that interview. It's kind of shocking. But people are enthusiastic for the prospect of continued Democrat rule. I mean, half the country really thinks that Team Blue is doing good for the country, that the number one important issues are not inflation or crime or illegal immigration, but are the latest gay trend or global warming or more electric vehicles. And those people are much more excited for Kamala Harris than they are for Joe Biden. Now, whether or not that's going to translate into actual voters in the Rust Belt, as opposed to those people who spend their time going to political rallies, I think that's going to be a harder question. Kamala Harris has definitely rallied the American left in a way that's given them some enthusiasm. Like, this is someone who we could win with. But is that actually going to reach the American voter? I think over the next 80 days that we have left, that's going to be a much harder sell.
Chris, I mean, how many debates are we going to have? Are we sure now? Are we finally there?
No.
And no, we're not. Okay, so
we don't know yet, right?
So riddle me this: like in the debates, real quick, we're running out of time. We're setting this up. I'm wondering now, given what you're telling me, if they're going to be normal. I mean, price controls, whatever. I mean, they seem to think, they're gonna be called liberal and leftist and say, yes, it's good, actually. I mean, what is there to debate? I mean, I'm starting to wonder what they're gonna positively propose. I don't see them tacking to the center.
No, they haven't tacked to the center at all. And I actually think that people are just going to tune in to see how Donald Trump acts and see how Kamala Harris acts. I mean, these are known entities. One's been vice president for 4 years. One's been president for 4 years. Neither of them can really make the promises, although Kamala Harris is trying, that they're going to do things differently when they finally get into power. They've both really been there. So people are going to want to see, is Donald Trump going to act presidential, or is he going to be the bully that a lot of middle or moderate America worries about? Is Kamala Harris actually going to be the visionary that Time magazine claims she is? I sincerely doubt that she's going to be able to do that. But we'll be covering it closely here and at the Beltway Brief, and we'll keep you updated.
Your final thought then, we heard today that Tulsi Gabbard is going to be brought in for the Trump campaign. We remember that she had her way with Kamala Harris in the debates before. So what does that mean for Trump bringing her on?
Well, I think she'll be an interesting debate person to bring on. She's a former Democrat. She understands the lines of attack that the Democrats will probably use. She actually has a somewhat similarly almost mechanical style to her as Kamala Harris does in the debate stage. She comes armed with facts. We saw that previously, but she doesn't have the natural flow of maybe a Donald Trump or some other politicians out there. You try to choose someone not just to be a good debater, but to be the type of debater that you expect your opponent to be. So you can argue against a proxy and not just another debate. And she may fit the bill for that.
Chris, we're happy to see you're back in the safe confines in Washington, D.C. today. We appreciate the update so much.
No ducks.
No ducks.
Good to be here. No ducks. I'm going back, though.
I think it was the most popular thing of the show yesterday. I'm just going to throw that out there. Thanks for the time, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
A California father's fight against radical gender ideology may be over. He'll be joining us next.
Spending so much time and money in court isn't fun, but he's worth it. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care how much pain it causes me. I'm never going to give up. I'm going to fight for him till my last breath, forever, as hard as I can. It's my duty as a dad.
Harrison Tinsley, a father from California, has been in a 4.5-year-long legal battle with the child's mother who's attempting to raise their son as non-binary. Harrison joins us now with some good news. So let's first go through just a brief description of you and the battle that you've been going through for custody of your son.
Well, I'm a proud dad. I love my son Sawyer more than anything. I've finally got full custody of him. It just feels like a miracle. Meant to be. I just want to give people hope. There's just too much of this going on, and kids are the most amazing, vulnerable amongst us, and we got to protect them.
Looking at just the legal battle itself, can you give people a glimpse into what your life was like trying to go through this?
Well, it's been the last 4.5 years. I literally was dating a girl. She got pregnant. We were both super excited, and she ended up keeping him from me. So I found out he was born about a week after he was born. And I filed in court 2 months later, and it took 13 more months just to meet him. So I met him finally at 15 months old. From there, I started visiting. I moved to the Bay Area, and I got half custody. Super grateful for that. Then his mom started to defame and harass me pretty horrendously online, and she was arrested for child endangerment, and she started to call Sawyer they, them, put dresses on him, things like that I wasn't comfortable with. I don't think any child should be confused in that way. And so I had to fight for him, tried to get full custody. I had this big trial, 5-day trial, and I'm thankful for that because a lot of people don't even get that amount of time, but it didn't give me custody. I decided that I was going to start speaking out, raise awareness, and I'm actually still appealing that trial decision, and I'm hoping to win just for merit. But yeah, I got a call from the San Francisco police to pick up my son, and San Francisco CPS stepped up, and they're the reason I have full custody right now.
At what age did she try to say that Sawyer was non-binary?
It was in between 1.5 to 2 years old.
And how can you even do that?
It's a good question. You'd have to ask her, but it's obviously not okay, and it's insane.
Yeah. Matthew?
I mean, unbelievable. So how did this release finally happen?
Like, how did I win full custody?
Yeah.
I went to go pick him up. I found out about the incident. There was a violent incident involving her and her father that Sawyer had to be witness to and even take part in, unfortunately. And according to Sawyer, his mom instructed him to hit his own grandpa. According to her, he did it on his own. But I think that either way, you should tell a 4-year-old to run away in that scenario. But so that's what he had to go through. And the San Francisco court actually denied my petition for emergency custody. It was CPS who stepped up and gave it to me and then did an investigation and decided to recommend full custody to me.
I think for so many people, this is foreign for them. They hear stories like this, but they don't actually know anybody that is going through something like this. And I want to ask you how you had hope going through this, knowing that this doesn't happen to a ton of people right now, but unfortunately, the numbers are growing.
You just have to dig deep within your soul and do what's right. You have a duty as a parent, as a person, to fight for children, to protect the most vulnerable, to love your kid, to do whatever it takes for them. It's just an inner battle between, good and evil and giving up and being brave. And you have to choose courage, and you have to choose your kid, and you have to just choose to do the right thing.
And what would you tell other parents right now that are going through a similar situation and they don't know what to do or where to turn, and to say, I know that my child is not a transgender, not a non-binary?
I would say start speaking the truth. I would make sure you guide your kid as best you can, give them wisdom, tell them the truth, tell them they're a boy, they'll always be a boy. Tell them just that you love them, help them through it, fight for them in court. You do everything you can, every single bit of you. You have to commit your very being to saving your kid. It has to be your purpose in life, is to love, help your kid grow, guide them, and you just have to give it everything. If you give it everything, at the very least, you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you did everything you could for your kid.
And Matthew, one of the things that we keep talking about on this show is Elon Musk and him leaving California over all of this. I know Harrison is interested in that as well, but that's one of the big things that we see as a cultural turning point.
Yeah, I have to say, the more people speak out like you, the better we are all going to be. And I've talked to many people from California who, one recent immigrant, in fact, said he was leaving because he couldn't talk to his child at the dentist. They'd lock the door and, separate you from your child because they had to have a discussion about all kinds of ridiculous things. So this is happening all over the place. And I want to just really emphasize for people at home, how did you get your child back? And in a way, it was through speaking out, right?
Yeah, it seemed all divine to me. I started speaking the truth, having courage, doing interview after interview, going to the California Capitol to literally fight some of these anti-parent, anti-kid bills you're talking about. We actually got Newsom to veto AB 957 last year, which was, forcing courts to basically give custody to a gender-affirming parent. I told them that I should be getting custody then because my son, Sawyer, says he's a boy. So his mom, by pretending he's non-binary, would be thus, the non-affirming parent. However, they just signed, AB 1955, and I just think it's incredible to see someone like Elon Musk step up and say he's going to move his businesses out. And we just need, everyone to start speaking the truth. No one agrees with this. I live in the Bay Area. I talk to people. I've yet to meet anyone who thinks that there should be any secrets kept from parents. Anyone under 18 should have any sort of hormones or surgery, and that any guy should be in girls' sports. These are all common sense. Vast majority of us agree. I don't know who they're catering to or representing,
but it's definitely not us. And Californians, everybody just needs to speak out.
Harrison, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and speaking out, because it takes so much courage to go through and fight for your son for as long as you did, and then just to keep going and making sure that everybody hears this message.
Thank you for having me. Save the kids.
Absolutely. When we come back, ESPN cut one of its biggest personalities. We'll tell you why budget cuts might be code for something else. Don't go anywhere. We're days away from football season, and ESPN just let go of two of its on-air personalities in Samantha Ponder and Robert Griffin III, reportedly because of budget cuts. But there's been wide speculation that it's something more. And here to discuss is Dan Dakich, host of Don't At Me on OutKick and a good friend of mine. So, Dan, let's focus on Sam Ponder first, because she's one of the biggest network hosts on ESPN. So why would they let her go so close to the NFL season?
Sam's a friend of mine. She was our sideline reporter when Mike Tirico did Tuesday night Big Ten games. And let me just say, she is an awesome human being. Like, there is nothing in the background here. They let her go, not for budget cuts, although, you know, it's pretty simple. 1.2 million is what she was making to work about 25 days. Pretty good gig. They let her go because of that. They let her go, according to people that I talked to, because she is a conservative and she did not adhere to the liberal views of ESPN. She was called in a few times about liking different tweets. I've been told, again, this is alleged. This is not her telling me. She had been called in about putting out different tweets. The whole thing with ESPN, Jill, is the whole men against women thing. Like, it is very logical and very, 5 years ago, you didn't have this discussion to say, look, men should not be participating against women in sport. That's just, you know, that's just the way it's been forever. That makes sense. Biology supports it. But ESPN doesn't look at it that way. They have been at the forefront of against that particular narrative, and they have warned their employees, don't get involved in this. She apparently went too far. She liked some things that Kirk Herbstreit had said. She liked, apparently, a Ben Shapiro tweet. She put out XX is a woman, XY is a man. And there's no way, zero, none, no chance. She was fired 3 weeks before hosting the biggest property ESPN has because of budget cuts. If it was budgetary, she would have been fired in April. She would have been fired immediately after last year. They'd have said no. But that's all crap. She was fired because, as a conservative woman expressing conservative views, even as simplistic and logical as, hey, men should not compete against women in women's sports, that gets you in trouble, and she went too far.
I love, though, that, you know, Twitter has gone through and hidden all of the likes, so nobody can get in trouble for that anymore, Dan. We have that going for us now. But you mentioned Kirk Herbstreit, and I saw the back and forth on Twitter between Sam Ponder and Kirk Herbstreit, and Sam replied, you know, XX and XY, men and women, and you know, you had Kirk Herbstreit on your show, and that was the thing that was making all of the headlines, where Kirk Herbstreit, and this is the first time we're going to cuss, he said, I don't give a shit, Dan. That's what he said on your show. He's going to come out here and say this, that he doesn't care. So they have a different standard, though. Is this it for Kirk Herbstreit? Because they can't get rid of him because he is the absolute top over there at ESPN, but they did get rid of Sam Ponder. So what's the difference here?
Well, there's a big difference. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit saying that aligns it with Stephen A. Smith saying all the stuff that he has said, or Kendrick Perkins saying all the things. Look, everybody that works at ESPN, I worked there for 10 years. And as a middle-aged white man, I knew exactly they were going to adhere to no politics. In fact, Seth Greenberg, one of the basketball analysts, and I were commenting on the debate probably in 16. And we got a call. Hey, no politics, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't racial. It wasn't sex. It wasn't anything. We're just commenting. And then, of course, you see Jalen Rose on NBA Countdown on the court of the NBA Finals lying about the death of Jacob Blake, I think it was, and lying about different racial things. But everybody at ESPN knows there is a different standard for African Americans. That's not speaking out of turn. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just telling you the way it is. Now, the only person that got hurt or fired other than Sam Ponder in this was Sage Steele, biracial woman who is conservative. Now, Sam successfully sued ESPN, but make no mistake about it. Everybody in that organization knows the rules. If you're a white guy, in particular a white guy, and apparently if you are a white woman, don't push the boundaries unless you are liberal. We've seen that with Elle Duncan. We've seen that with Nicole Briscoe, a white woman. We've seen that if you are liberal, you're fine. This isn't even up for debate. This is known within the company. This is known from people that have been there. Nobody likes it. Nobody thinks it's fair. But honest to God, Jill, that's the way it is.
Dan, I couldn't agree more. It angers me so much. Like many people, I've stopped watching as much of this stuff as I used to because it interferes with the viewing experience. And so my question is, this has been going on for a while, right? This has been going on for years now. Is there any end to this? I mean, did we just keep firing people because they like a tweet? I mean, is there any repercussions? Is there any way to turn this around?
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. A friend of mine that knows Sam said that when she was called by one of her bosses, Seth Markham, who runs studio, about liking a tweet, at one point, again, this is all alleged, this third party, but at one point she said, that's all you have to do? That's all you've got to do? Is see who I'm liking on Twitter?
Seriously.
Like, don't we have bigger issues? I got called one time because I was in a player at Indiana who I recruited, Dane Fife, and one of his buddies and I were going back and forth. I got called in. Hey, we saw your reply. I go, yeah, it wasn't vulgar. It wasn't racist. It wasn't sexist. Well, what does it mean? And when I told them, they're like, oh, well, you still have to call Norby Williamson the vice president. I was literally 2 hours before doing an Ohio State-Michigan basketball game. And I said to myself, you guys got to be nuts. And then I watched, and here's Elle Duncan breaking in to a women's basketball game, talking about abortion and talking about don't say gay rules in Florida. And everybody at ESPN looks at each other and goes, what in the hell is this? But to answer your question, I don't see it changing. I honestly don't. Unless there's a change in leadership, unless there's a change in ownership. Let's say Elon Musk buys ESPN, right? Or Elon Musk buys Disney or whatever. That might be the only saving grace, because the guys running it, Jimmy Pitaro, Burke Magnus, Connor Snell, those guys running ESPN, they are so scared, I mean petrified, of being called racist, of having a diversity report that doesn't come out bad. They sit in building 4 at ESPN, terrified that these things are going to happen because it would affect their stock options. This is alleged, but this is reasonable. Let's put it this way. I would almost go to factual based on the people talking about it. So it actually is kind of funny. It's so ridiculous. Like, I'll give you one. So Dan Orlovsky, when the boxer, with the XY chromosome, beat up a woman, put out "Protect Our Daughters," and he quickly deleted it. Okay, and then he said today, why did you delete it? Well, it goes against ESPN's policy. I said, wait a second. Protect Our Daughters goes against ESPN's policy? Well, what? How does that go again? I have a daughter, I have a stepdaughter, I have a sister, I have an ex-wife, a wife, a mother, a friend in Jill. How does that
go
against Protect Our Daughters? How does that go against any policy? Isn't that what men are supposed to do? Protect your damn daughter? Man, makes me crazy. Excuse me.
I look at this entire industry, Dan, and there's a reason why I'm in news now and not sports, because we can go through, and at least with the female reporters that, this was my job, this was what I looked up to, Michelle Tafoya, Sage Steele, Sam Ponder, myself. If you're conservative And in the sports industry for media, they know you're conservative because there are so few of them that we can literally count them on one or two hands. And now everybody is slowly working their way out, whether it was their choice or not. But let me ask you the question. Is the sports media industry going to be at all welcoming to conservatives anytime in the future?
No, absolutely not. Because the guys in charge, as I said, while I guarantee you, I'll bet you money, these rich dudes that I just mentioned, I'll guarantee you they're voting for Trump. Guarantee you, because they see Kamala Harris talking about tax cuts. See our tax, not cuts, 70% tax rates and the craziness of the economy. It's like my stepdaughter went to Harvard. All right, so we'd go to Harvard. She played on the softball team. You know, all the Harvard students, you know, they're liberal, blah, blah. All the Harvard parents who are paying their freight couldn't be more conservative. So the deal is simple. It's all a shell game. The dudes in Building 4 at ESPN, or the guys with the big money in CBS or NBC or ABC, they're conservative as hell deep down. No doubt in my mind who they're voting for. I've actually had conversations with a few of them, not to the level where I knew they were conservative, but certainly to the level where a few of them knew that what's going on at their companies are crap. So look, make no mistake. Is it going to change? Probably not anytime soon, because the guys running it, I swear to you, Jill, the last thing they want is some kind of report out there that says, hey, look, ESPN isn't diverse. ESPN is racist. Look who they're hiring. Look what they're doing. Swear to God, that is the number one thing on the boss's minds there in that big old tower. And that's not a big tower, in Building 4 where they all hang.
Here's the problem with this, right? It's so degrading to human beings. On the one hand, it's like a grown-ass man or woman is going to have their tweets looked at and who they liked. I mean, the response to that should be, go to hell. F off. Like, well, you got better things to do with your time. Like, we're adults. I'm doing an adult job. What are you doing, right? It's so degrading when you work in that environment. And then the other side of it, and here's where I think you hit the nail on the head with this, and this really needs to be hit home. The answer to every problem for us in every sector of media can't be and pray that Elon Musk buys it, but it kind of is right now. And the reason is because Musk doesn't care. Because like the rest of us, by the way, people who have skin in the game, right? We get called names all the time. Guess what? It's not that bad. You keep your dignity. And at some point, these guys are going to have to stand up and realize, yeah, there's worse things in life than getting, sued and called names by the other side. You're in a divided nation, and if you want to return sanity, they're going to have to grow a pair and stand up. But I have your pessimism as well, because, these are cowardly people, and that needs to be said. At some point, this isn't prudence, right? This isn't wisdom. This is cowardice.
Dan, final 60 seconds to you.
There's absolutely no doubt it's cowardice. It's a bunch of guys that walk around thumping their chest saying, look how diverse I've made ESPN. You got to understand, there was a book written. These guys have all the fun, and it painted ESPN as an old boys club, and that hurt inside ESPN, and they never want to go back to that. So they would rather be seen as these maybe unfair, champions of diversity, DEI, all of that. The thing that irks me is, look, I believed ESPN when I worked there. We're serving sports fans anytime, everywhere. That is last. I've had guys call me from trucks that I used to work with on a Tuesday night show, say, this show is so bad. They let Mike Tirico go, didn't offer him a contract. They let Brad Nessler go, didn't offer him a contract. They've let so many people go to hire diverse, to hire some type of person, that it has crushed the quality. I don't know enough about a broadcast, but when I sat with my old producers, Bart Fox and Scott Johnson, Scott's still there, they're like, can you believe this happened? Can you believe? The quality has gone absolutely awful to people that know, and I don't think it's going to change, because I think they would rather be called cowards than be called anything else.
Man, I wish you really said how you felt, Dan. It's so good seeing you, friend.
Age, who cares?
It's so good seeing you. Thanks so much.
Seeing you. Thank you.
We'll catch up soon. A Hollywood heavyweight speaks out against the industry. We'll recap what Dennis Quaid said coming up next. Dennis Quaid recently went on the Joe Rogan podcast and discussed all aspects of woke religion, including the media's fawning over Kamala Harris, cancel culture, and men playing in women's sports.
You know, one of the things that I said that drove me crazy about Hollywood was there's people that had differing opinions about things, but they would never speak out because it could damage their career.
Right.
And
That's
it really
what's going
can.
on now.
They will fucking blackball you.
They will. I mean, they tried, there were a couple attempts to cancel me while we were making Reagan, in fact, kind of half-hearted, I guess. But it has become that, and that ain't right.
Here to discuss this with us is Christian Toto, founder of HollywoodInToto.com and the host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. So, Christian, what's your reaction when you hear Dennis Quaid say all these things?
Well, two things. One, he's been red-pilled in spectacular fashion, and it's wonderful to hear. But more importantly, this is really the biggest secret in Hollywood that everyone knows. If you are right of center, you are punished in the industry. Now, there are a few exceptions. Jon Voight, who happens to be in the Reagan movie, maybe Tim Allen, you could say as well, a couple others. But generally speaking, there are so many stories about people either hiding their views or being punished for their views. I think maybe the ultimate examples are Kevin Sorbo and James Woods. They've been acting in Hollywood for decades, but once they embrace being a conservative, they're done. Kevin Sorbo makes his own movies now because he can't get work in Hollywood. And James Woods is essentially retired by default for the same reason. So it is a terrible situation. It is a new version of the old blacklist. And, kudos to Joe Rogan for saying it out loud because it needs to be said.
Yeah, Christian, I was remarkable earlier this year. Randy Quaid was at a small event I was at. I didn't get a chance to talk to him. But I've seen him also attend some other events that were surprising, right? Dangerous for someone like that. And it's good to see him come out. But also, I guess it's pretty obvious where he stands because he's starring in this new movie called Reagan. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's coming out August 30th. It's got a lot of well-known faces. Jon Voight, of course, Quaid. You've got Nick Searcy, Mena Suvari, Penelope Ann Miller. And, this is not going to be a Hollywood hit piece. It's made outside of that ecosystem. It's going to really tell the facts of Reagan's remarkable life story. So I think, if you're right-leaning, you can really look forward to something of consequence, that it's not going to quibble on this or that or make up sequences like they've done in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see, what a full-bodied biopic of this great leader is, because why haven't we seen it already? It seems overdue.
That seems almost shocking that a conservative audience will have something to look forward to when they go to the movies. But when they're watching television at home, we know the nightly news and all the prime time, all the comedians there at night. This is not where the conservatives typically hang out. But Stephen Colbert and his audience recently lost it over one of Colbert's lines about CNN. And it wasn't supposed to be a laugh line. Let's take a look.
Trump has kind of been thrown on his heels by this, and he's not really sure how to go after Vice President Harris. He knew his attack lines on President Biden. He really has struggled with how to go after someone who's 20 years younger than him, who is a different gender, a different race. It's kind of been this moment where he has not been able to coalesce around a single attack line.
I know you guys are objective over there, that you just report the news as it is. No, I know. CNN makes a... I know
that's supposed to be a laugh line?
I wasn't supposed to be, but I guess it is.
I guess it is, because we all know. But you recently wrote a piece on Blaze News about this. So tell us what you make of that conversation.
It's such a funny moment. You don't get many funny moments on The Late Show these days. It's not the whole purpose of the presentation. What I thought was interesting, you really watch their reactions. Stephen Colbert is giddy and almost has this, oh, shucks, I got my hand caught in the cookie jar look. And the same with Caitlin Collins. They know what they're doing. They understand. Now, if they were honest journalists and someone was laughing at their approach to reporting, they might be upset, they might be offended, but they're just giggling like, oh, you, come on. I mean, they understand. They know we know. It is a farce at this point. And I think the reaction from the crowd and the reaction from those two main people on the stage, I think it speaks volumes.
Christian, real quick, give us something good coming up, something interesting, something that you're interested in, some project coming out that gives us some hope.
Well, a couple of ones that are intriguing. I don't know how good they'll be. We'll have to see. A couple of sequels. One is the new Joker film, which is a quasi-musical. It was obviously the first one was such a hit. Also, Beetlejuice. The tracking on that from the box office point of view is huge, coming out in September. And then this weekend we have Alien Romulus. If you love the Alien movies, you'll get something at it. It's almost like a greatest hits compilation of those films. But let me tell you, when you watch the new film, all you want to do is rewatch Alien and Aliens all over again because they've aged beautifully. They're darn near perfect, and they just can't get any better than that. So if you want to relive something new, you check out the new film. But I just recommend revisiting the classics. It's just enjoyable and scary and cutting edge, and they haven't aged a day.
Why do they just have to rehash? No original ideas.
They can't.
No original ideas.
There's nothing new.
It's partly our fault because we rush out to the theater. We almost feel compelled. I've seen every Alien film to date. I need to see the new one. So we take part of the blame too. But listen, Hollywood is conservative in the negative way where they're just afraid of risk. And that's why we get all these different sequels and prequels and remakes and reboots and reimaginings.
There it is. Christian Toto, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And Matt, that's going to wrap it up for the show. But isn't it funny that ESPN and Hollywood, you can't be conservative anywhere right now?
No, it's illegal. It's against the law. But it's not against the law here at Blaze News Tonight, which is why we're having a good time.
We are. And we'll have a great time this weekend.